On August 14, 1950, in Durham and Hartlepool County, John Darwin was born. He grew up attending St. Xavier's Grammar School in Hartlepool. Later, he attended De La Salle College in Salford, Lancashire, where he studied biology and chemistry. On December 22, 1973, at the age of 23, he married Stevenson in Blackpool. They had met while she was a teenager, and she was only a few years younger than him. Their first child, a son named Mark, was born to them in 1975, 2 years later. And thus, in 1978, they welcomed Anthony, a son, into the world as their second child. Following his graduation from college, John spent the next 18 years teaching science and math at DOE and Side College. Following those 18 years, he moved on to work as a prison guard at HM Homehouse and held a position as a medical receptionist. John had a habit of always seeking for methods to increase his wealth, as if he were a lottery winner. He would thus engage in activities like small vehicle boot sales. He was trading stocks. He even included his sons in some of his money-making enterprises. At the age of 15, he persuaded his son Anthony to go door to door. He genuinely involved both of his sons in his money-making ventures, and together they would engage in activities such as painting gnomes, selling escort girls, and cultivating African snails. Thus, he and his partner made the decision to launch their own company, renting out houses in Seaton Carew. They quickly acquired 12 residences, one of which was a waterfront home where they lived. The address was the Cliff, number 3, which sounds quite sophisticated. Then, in 2002, they added 2 more properties to their collection, making a total of 14. Sadly, they were not earning enough in rent to cover the costs of these 14 mortgages. They were therefore completely in debt by 2002. They succeeded in piling up about $700,000 in debt. They were in danger of becoming bankrupt, facing the possibility of foreclosure on at least one of their properties. And to make matters worse, on March 21, 2002, early in the morning, John vanished from Seaton. Clunner John and his neighbor Harry Rosen, who had witnessed John taking out his hand-built red canoe, which he had named Orca, for a morning paddle in the North Sea. The day spent on the water was quite peaceful. Though John was an accomplished kayaker, skilled enough that he not only owned a kayak, but also custom-built it with his own hands and gave it a name. To earn a kayak, in my opinion, you really have to be quite serious about kayaking, let alone construct one from the ground up and give it a name. Though an accomplished kayaker, an experienced kayaker, but he never came back. Later that day, he had work, but he failed to show up. His coworkers then called the police right away to report. When John disappeared, a search was immediately launched. It was a massive search, too. The price was £150,000. They looked over the entire shoreline, which is 62 square miles, or 160 square kilometers, but they couldn't find John. Approximately 1:15 a.m. the morning following John's disappearance. In fact, they found his paddle not far from the spot he launched himself. They also discovered pieces of his broken red watercraft. After 4 days, things weren't looking good. They had not discovered him, so they reduced the scope of their search. They discovered pieces of his capsized canoe's paddle. As a result, they believed he had passed away. This greatly baffled the police. The North Sea had been very quiet that day, and they were kind of at a loss as to how someone with so much experience could go missing or have any problems at all. So one should really expect no problems from someone with that level of experience. It was assumed that he might have inadvertently entered the shipping lane, and that, being a small kayak, he might have become entangled in the propellers of a larger vessel, which would account for the fact that his cancer was discovered in fragments. Law enforcement officials, along with John's family, made a public appeal to anyone who could provide any information about what they saw or knew. However, no one spoke up. The most startling aspect of the whole affair is that Mark, the eldest son, had recently moved to London at the time of his father's disappearance. Thus, he returned immediately. However, their youngest son, Anthony, was in Canada for a prearranged vacation during which he intended to pop the question to his fiancée. Thus, the timing was really unfortunate. As though you're about to embark on this thrilling journey and ideally get engaged. And then your dad disappears before you had a chance to ask him out. Following an inquest, John Darwin was formally pronounced deceased in December 2003. His family, along with Mark and Anthony, arranged a memorial service for him in August of the same year. I think she received around £250,000 from the life insurance, pension, and mortgage protection plans. And then on December 1st, 2007, exactly 5 years later, none other than John Darwin casually walks into the West End police station and declares, "I believe I may be missing, but I suffer from amnesia and can't recall anything from the last 5 years up until the West End." She is ecstatic that her spouse has returned from the dead and calls the police. Subsequently, they notify the Cleveland police, as it was there that John was initially reported missing. They handled his disappearance and reported it to the West End police 4 months ago after receiving a tip suggesting he might still be alive. So, one of their co-workers had given them a call and said, "I think I heard." And as a doctor's office receptionist and on the phone to John, if you recall, it is strange, in my opinion, for her to be speaking with John on the phone while at the front desk. However, there were also a few reports of seeing John. Thus, one of his former co-workers had actually seen him and reported him to the police, saying something like, "Hey, I think I saw John." But because the person who phoned the police wasn't completely sure, they never looked into it further. Therefore, it makes sense that you would be a little dubious if you saw someone who had been deceased for around 5 years. However, you also need to be fairly certain that you notify the authorities if you see someone who has been deceased for 5 years. You're just going to remark, "Oh my God, that guy looks so much like John," if you're not sure about it. Do you understand what I mean? You're not going to be all pretty saw and call the cops. "I saw this deceased guy." I think they need to have simply given that a brief investigation. Because this case was so significant. A man seemingly came back from the dead. The police and media both undertake some investigation. Yes, they had it spot on. Allow me to explain what transpired throughout those 5 years. As I previously stated in 2002, John and his family were facing overwhelming debt and were in danger of filing for bankruptcy. However, John was too arrogant to declare bankruptcy. He therefore devised a new strategy to pay off his debt, and that strategy was to pretend to be dead on March 21st, 2002, the day he took his yacht out into the North Sea and seemingly perished there. The truth is that he had paddled out far enough to be invisible to anyone. After that, he proceeded to wait until 7 p.m. at the first pier south of Seaton, Canoe. Arrived, picked him up, and drove him home. In fact, they are in the home directly next to the one they previously occupied. Thus, they say, the Cliff's house is number 3. The house adjacent to that belonged to them. It resembled having an adjacent space. John remained there and pretended to be dead. The main bedroom stood about 3.5 feet tall, and there was this little cupboard. Furthermore, they had created a passageway that led away from this cabinet. When you open this cabinet, you'll find what appears to be a tiny doorway leading to the other house. John would therefore be able to come and go as he pleases using that. Furthermore, when the police conducted their original investigation, that is, when John first vanished, they did not find this tunnel. He would spend the entire day hanging around at the house, and he would simply enter this corridor and head to the other house to hide out if there was a knock on the door or the doorbell rang. It's actually very awful to think about it, but not even her sons, Mark and Anthony, knew that John was still alive. Not to mention, as I mentioned earlier, Anthony was on a trip that he had planned just to pop the question to his girlfriend. Then, before he has a chance, his father vanishes, yet his father was aware that his father had not truly passed away. On one of the most significant days of his life, his son's impending proposal to his girlfriend, he simply prepared a fictitious death. If I've ever seen narcissism, that is it. Even worse, the two boys unintentionally assisted their mother. They believed she was a bereaved widower and had no idea how to manage her finances. After pretending to be dead, receiving life insurance payouts, and paying off their debts, they assisted her in opening offshore bank accounts. At that point, John asked, "Well, how am I going to live my life? I can't stay hidden in this house forever, you know." Therefore, they planned to travel abroad so that John could leave the house, engage in activities, and go out in public without worrying about being spotted by friends, the police, or anybody else. Being cooped up in the house may drive you a bit nuts. Even though I was too exhausted to accomplish anything at all, I was going crazy when I had to carve it and had to stay in the house for 7 days. I still think that you went a little crazy being confined to your house, without even being able to take a walk to breathe some fresh air, 7 days a week. It was as if he was simply feeling it and had to spend a lot of time at that house. He so desired to travel abroad and, begin living there almost debt-free. Since stealing the identity of a dead baby is the natural next step, he reasoned that this would be the best course of action to make it a reality. Correct? He would therefore put on a highly complex disguise and head to the library. He would put on his hat and collar and act as though he had a limp, which makes me think of Leonardo DiCaprio in those pictures where he's hiding out and trying not to be recognized. He's wearing his helmet and his puffy jacket up here. Compared to John Darwin's disguise, that one is perhaps more effective. I have a faux lamb and an expensive coat. Please. It makes sense why he was seen. Yes, he does use his super-secret disguise to enter the library. He's also going through all of those death certificates, the moment he encounters John Jones. Sadly, he had passed away at the age of 5 weeks after being born in the same year as John Darwin in the neighboring town of Sutherland. And Sir John Darwin made the decision to steal his identity, using it to apply for a passport under the name John Jones. Additionally, in order to receive a signature on your passport application in the UK, you must be in good standing with the community, and a librarian qualifies. It so happens that during his whole life, John Darwin made the acquaintance of a librarian, I suppose, and used his modest disguise to slip out and peruse these death certificates. He obtained that signature after becoming acquainted with a librarian. Thus, he obtained his fictitious passport under the name of John Jones. The most peculiar aspect of this, in my opinion, is that he continued to list his address as number 3 on his passport application. After all of the work he put in to, go out in disguise, look through death records, and befriend a librarian at the same time so he can get his application and steal, he still owns and lives in the Eclipse, which, if you recall, is his house that he owned with a R, and I guess before he disappeared, the identity of a baby that has died. And yet he chooses to include that address, thus takes a chance by listing that address on his package application anyhow. After obtaining the passport application, he travels to Cyprus to view potential properties to purchase, as they are in dire need of a new residence following their inability to make mortgage payments on their previous 14 homes. As a result, he was forced to stage his own death in order to escape the mounting debt that resulted from these 14 properties. Naturally, the sound and audacity is to continue on and purchase another home after fabricating a death. Unfortunately, though, they were unable to buy the house. Maybe it's a little too hot for them due to the linguistic barrier. Following their return to the UK, John and Anne's relationship was somewhat toxic. John thus met Kelly Steele, another woman, when they returned to the United Kingdom. They connected immediately after meeting in a video game chat. John began remarking on how inexpensive the land is in Kansas, where Kelly, who was also married, resided. John began to become fixated on Kansas as a result, and he also felt close to the idea that he was speaking with Kelly. She essentially told him to go ahead and try his luck, letting her handle the situation of having a deceased man around. John saw this as an invitation to pay Kelly a visit, so he planned a 2-week vacation to Kansas and stayed at her home during that time. It's unclear to me how that was accomplished, given that she was married, had a family, and kids. He didn't actually remain there either, I suppose. When he arrived, she took him to his room, which he entered. A few minutes later, as he began undressing, she strolled by and became enraged, acting as though he had left the door open. She said, "This is not acceptable." She also ejected him from the home. I'm not sure if this was one of those situations when she met him in person after they clicked during an online conversation. She claimed to be unwell and used this as justification to throw him out of the house because, from what I heard, it didn't sound all that bad. He seemed to be about to unbuckle his belt, had the door half open, and had a shut-off. Therefore, it wasn't quite Commander. She just noticed him about to unbuckle his belt and taking off his shirt. She said, "Leave." That is repulsive. Perhaps he did so to be fair. I wasn't present. It's possible that the door blew open while he was getting dressed, but I'm not sure about the circumstances. It's possible that he unintentionally closed partway. Whatever it was, he wasn't completely nude when it occurred, is all. It appears that she may have overreacted, and that she may have thought, well, how can I get this man out of my house after seeing him in person? With the door, you've taken off your shirt. Is it open yet? John proceeded to stay in a motel, and it appears that the tragedy didn't really deter them from making real estate investments, because Kelly and John jointly bought a $50,000 ranch with a rundown farmhouse on the property. Kelly and her family traveled to reside in this farmhouse with an agreement. They made this buy and were going to mess it up. After reserving his apartment, John left for the UK and began to bug Kelly because he wasn't really getting a return on his investment, man. It appears that she had not actually taken any action to renovate the farmhouse as they had planned. It appears like Kelly basically kind of conned John into purchasing her and her family a home and a ranch. After all, what did he even stand to gain from that? Which makes the entire thing seem kind of strange to me. He might have easily traveled to America and utilized that money to purchase a residence on his own. However, he has now lost both the house and the money. Girl boss maelstrom from Kelly. I don't know what he was expecting, but he kind of deserved it. Yes, he is unhappy that she is not fulfilling her half of the bargain and that he is not benefiting from the arrangement. Kelly called him a terrible excuse for a human being when he began to threaten her and send her emails mentioning her family and even her animals. She claimed that it took a very long time for her life to calm down, return to normal, and for her to stop dwelling on the terrible things and threats he was sending her on a daily basis. John actually ceased emailing her at that point, and it was time for him to take action. She had actually contacted her local police, and they had urged her to contact the FBI, and he concluded that buying a bird would be his next course of action. You know, try barking instead of trying to win in households. You know the old adage, he wants to buy a boat that he can spend a lot of time on the water. John then travels to Gibraltar to see a 1973-built catamaran. It appeared somewhat more worn out. John therefore insisted that the sellers fix everything and that once he did, he would buy it for half price. The owners, of course, said, "No, sorry, John." Anne then made the choice to relocate to Panama City in July of 2006. These folks are just, dispersed all over the area. Simply put, you have no idea what they will do in the upcoming season. I had no idea what they would do next when I was doing my investigation on this. They therefore purchased a $50,000 flat in Panama City because, well, more real estate is clearly what they need. However, after purchasing this $50,000 condo, they allowed a moving professional to snap their picture, which was then uploaded to their website and moved to Panama.com. This picture could easily be found by searching for John in Panama on Google. It's not the best choice, really, for a man who is said to be dead. They came to the realization that they genuinely required another property while they were residing in this flat. They so made the decision to begin their search for a remote Panamanian property. In March of 2007, they bought a 4-acre ranch in Esquivel, located around 2 hours outside of Panama City, for £200,000. Their intention was to construct a hotel on the property where guests could have canoeing vacations. You just can't make this up, in my opinion. After nearly dying in a canoeing accident, he now wants to construct a hotel with canoeing vacations. I find it hard to believe that after all of his blunders, this individual escaped justice. First of all, he claimed to have entered his own address on the passport application and staged his own death while strolling about the town, following the great lengths he took to get a false identity. Lutz, the Panamanian relocation agency, took his picture and allowed them to upload it to Panama.com, where anyone may view it via Google. After feigning his own death on a canoe, he subsequently wants to build a hotel where guests can go on paddling vacations. Though I don't necessarily think he's going to be caught for allowing people to go on canoeing vacations, I just find it incomprehensible. In the midst of all of this, they are closing on a 200,000-pound ranch that is located 2 hours outside of Panama, and she is flying back and forth between the UK and Panama to sell the last of their properties in the UK and complete their move to Panama. John is micromanaging the hell out of her as she is doing this. He created a color-coded spreadsheet for her and ensures that she follows it exactly. He also sends her numerous emails encouraging her to complete the task. You're occupied all the time. Ensure that you're never idle. Additionally, he would occasionally send her lewd emails with the subject lines, "Nerd in the mood for love." Oh well, in April 2007 they close on the sale of the property next to number 3, the cliff house that John had been hiding out in. In fact, it had been moved into their son Mark's name in 2006. Thus, Mark's name was used for the sale. The sales revenues were subsequently transferred to Panama, and then, in October of 2007, they completed their relocation to Panama after selling their third home, the Cliffs, for £295,000. To be clear, I have no idea what Anna is currently telling her kids, as if their father has passed away. As of right now, they continue to believe that their father has passed away, and their mother has sold every property they own and moved to Panama. I'm not sure if they simply believe that she is a bereaved widow. At this point, I had no idea what she would have been saying them. For them, that had to have been such an odd circumstance. Perhaps they assumed it was a coping mechanism for her grief. I'm not sure. I feel so awful for them because picture discovering that your dad has been lying about his death for 6 years and that he and your mother have been keeping it a secret from you the whole time. They simply intended to go to Panama, far from you, and carry on with their lives, leading you to believe that your father has passed away. 2 weeks later, she moves to what she believes to be a permanent location in Panama. John informs her that he has known for 4 months that his identity as John Jones will not be accepted for a visa, because in order to relocate permanently to Panama, one must obtain a letter from their local police department in the UK, essentially stating that they plan to become citizens and have not really been involved in any criminal activity. This letter is obviously not going to be possible because John Jones passed away. John Darwin, they believe, passed away 5 years ago at the age of 5 weeks. John Darwin, therefore, takes the natural course of action for a guy in his circumstances and returns to the UK while remaining in Panama. When he visits the police station, he claims to have amnesia and is unable to recall anything from the previous 5 years because it seems like a plausible explanation. The fact that he can't recall anything from the last 5 years is quite convenient. However, that takes us back to the beginning of this bizarre tale. Naturally, as soon as John entered the police station, they started to suspect him because, as I previously mentioned, there had been sightings. Over the previous 4 months, they had been conducting an investigation into these sightings and tip-offs, as well as the fact that, despite appearing to be a grieving widow who had been traveling abroad, she had been selling their houses, moving abroad, and sending money abroad after reports of her husband still being living. Before John ever turned himself in, the UK police had already added together 2 and 2. Besides, even if they weren't spying on her, it's kind of like a person dies, his wife gets all the insurance money, pays off their obligations, and then all of a sudden he says, "I'm actually alive." It's obvious that the police thought something wasn't quite right. Given the significance of the case, the media was clearly correct. After 5 years, the person returns from the dead, and a journalist really took a plane to Panama, showed up to Anne's house, he actually found out her address, and showed up at our place. In an exclusive interview, she expressed her happiness that John had been discovered and was still alive. The journalist then produces a picture of herself and John taken in Panama 18 months prior. John was detained in Basingstoke on December 8, 2007, not far from the performance. After being accused with using deceit to obtain life insurance money and fabricating statements to obtain a passport while staying with his son Anthony, He was taken into custody at Manchester Airport the next day. John was sentenced to 6 years and 3 months in prison after entering a guilty plea to 7 charges of fraud related to the fraud allegations. He also entered a not guilty plea to 6 charges of deception and 9 charges of utilizing criminal property. She had to appear in court as a result. Ultimately, she was found guilty and given a 6-year, 6-month prison sentence. She claimed that she was forced into falling for the hoax, so 3 months after John and her sons were actually required to testify at her trial. Consequently, her sons publicly declared that they were not interested in keeping up a contact with either of their parents. In fact, Mark told the media that Anthony was a horrible liar who had gone to absurd measures to discredit him. "They're just as evil as each other," he continued, and I quote, "Dad told me he was dead and that one terrible line had vanished. She did, however, lie. For a duration of 6 years, she represented the lies. Even though the full weight of the evidence pointed against her, she continued to lie. She forced a court case and dragged us through agony." John and Anne were both released from prison in 2011. John was freed twice, once in January and once in March. After their divorce in 2012, she expressed her desire to be free from his domineering behaviors. "He wasn't a good guy," she said. "He had always had such a strong hold on her life that she could hear his voice in her brain even when he was not present." She said he treated her more like a student than a partner, isolating her from one of her closest school friends. She does act as though John tricked her into the entire situation, yet there were extended periods of time when he was away from home, including the 2 weeks that he spent with Kelly. The worst aspect about it is that she had the opportunity to inform her boys or the police at that same moment. She deliberately tricked everyone, even her sons. In actuality, though, she was able to revive her friendships with Anthony and Mark. The Crown Prosecution Service declared in February 2012 that they had been successful in recouping the full $501,000 in life insurance and pension payments that they had received, as well as a portion of the proceeds from the sale of the 2 Panamanian houses they had bought. Because John had no assets, and all of the assets were in Anne's name, apparently they couldn't be in his name, they declared in April 2014 that he had only paid £121 of the £680,000 that he owed. This was because John was supposed to be dead. However, by July 2015, the couple had paid back nearly all of this money and had no assets. John is currently living in the Philippines with Mercy, a woman he married 23 years ago. She conducted an interview and stated, "I am aware of what he did. He paid the fine and is aware of it. There's no need to remind him."